You're listening to Dakota Spotlight, a production of Forum Communications. My name is James Wallner. This is episode 8 of Call Me Shelly, the mysterious disappearance of Michele Julson. By the way, if this is your first time listening, or if you've not listened to episodes 1 through 7 of this season, I recommend that you start there. In this episode, an interview with Shelly's son, Jaden Woodworth. On August 2nd, 1994, Jaden was 3.5 years old when his mother dropped him off at his grandparents', then disappeared. Today, he's 31. Jaden speaks with me about some of his hazy memories of his mother, about growing up without her, about his father and grandparents, and more. And we will be talking about something else in this episode, too. In 2019, Jaden's father, Kevin Woodworth, met with Bismarck police investigators again to talk about Shelly's disappearance. The meeting didn't go so great. Bismarck PD put Kevin in an interview room and pressed him, looking for a confession. They pressed pretty hard until finally Kevin Woodworth abruptly stood up, said, "We are done," and walked out of the Bismarck PD in utter frustration. And why did he storm out? Why the frustration? It was all over a specific detail about Shelly's disappearance, a small yet very important detail I'll be telling you all about. And by the end of this episode, I believe you'll understand what I mean when I say, had I been Kevin Woodworth in that very situation, I would have done the exact same thing. I would inform the detectives that I was done speaking with them, I'd stand up, and I'd walk out. In fact, I'd probably never return. All that coming up in this episode of Dakota Spotlight.
How would you get abducted from 140 American to 300 block East Broadway without somebody seeing it on a Tuesday afternoon?
I think something happened to her. I think somebody took her.
You need to call the police, and you need to get yourself a protection order.
Burnt Creek Club.
Bartender at the Burnt Creek.
Told her anytime after 2 o'clock she could stop by and pick him up, and she never did so.
And I was specifically looking for that car, Shelly's car.
Was one of the group allegedly harassing Shelly at the bar.
But there was two railroad workers, and I thought they talked to one.
I first attempted to contact Shelly's son, Jaden Woodworth, several weeks ago. I was unable to get a hold of him, and I soon learned from his grandparents that Jaden was incarcerated. I then wrote him a letter in jail, only to have it returned to me. I just missed him. He'd been released on parole to a transition facility in Bismarck. One day recently, my phone rang. I picked up, and a voice I didn't recognize asked, "Is this James Wallner? This is Jaden Woodworth." We spoke briefly that day and set up a time for an interview. Here he is.
I've just made some mistakes, and it ended up getting me locked up for a little while. But kind of got my head in the right area, and big hopes for the future, and keep my butt out of trouble.
Sounds like a good plan. You, as you told me yesterday, you fled from, was it law enforcement in some situation, something like that?
Yeah, I fled in a motor vehicle.
We wish you the best moving forward. We're not here to talk about your criminal record, really. We're here to talk about your missing mother, Shelly Julson. Tell us about what memories you have of your mother, if any at all.
I remember her trailer. I remember playing in the yard there on the stairs a couple times, things like that. I know there was a vehicle out front that I used to play in, I guess, every once in a while. I always used to call it my car. And I don't remember a whole lot of my mom, I guess.
When you think back in your mind, like, do you have a recollection of her voice, her face, anything? I'm just curious.
Couple of things that stand out, I guess, is right. I remember being in the car with her at one time, and then I remember telling her I was going to run away, and jumped on my trike and made it maybe half a block, and she chased me down.
Tell us about what you think of the podcast, how anything you've learned new, or just how it's affected you, what you think about all this. I mean, I can't really imagine what it would be like for you.
You know, it was kind of shocking when I came across it. You know, I was just farting around on my phone, and I came across, Inforum yeah, I think it was episode 4, and I was actually pretty blown away that there was a whole podcast on it. I ended up jumping on my podcast app, and I found, the Dakota Spotlight, and then I listened to it from there. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's I guess there's some stuff that I didn't really know.
Let's talk about your father. We talked about a lot on the podcast, and he did not speak with me. So what's your take on the way, your father's been portrayed, I guess you could say, in the podcast versus your experience with him?
Well, my dad, growing up, he did everything he could. Spent as much time with me as he could. I guess I wish he would have spent a little more time with me at times, but he worked. He's a single dad. Spent a lot of time with my grandfather as well, but he was good to me. I've never known my dad ever to be abusive or anything like that. And I mean, I've through the years I've pushed his buttons a lot, and yeah, and I mean he's had his hands full with me, but yeah, he's always taken good care of me, and he's cared a lot.
In the podcast, Shelly's friends talk about he was abusive towards her. That doesn't resonate really with your experience, it sounds like.
No, I can't speak for him, I guess, and just say, like that can't be, but it doesn't fit my dad from, the person I know.
Have you spoken with law enforcement?
I spoke with a detective, I want to say it was 2018 or in the middle there. And they had spoken with my dad beforehand, and they were basically more or less trying to get a confession out of him from what it sounded like, and that's when he was like, no way, like I'm out of here. And I spoke to my dad before I had gone, and he's like, these guys want to talk to you and we'll let you know about this and whatever. And then he's like I don't really think you should go, but I went, and they had told me a lot of different stuff, and the one thing that they had told me as well, they said that my father and my grandfather had reported my mother missing the same day, or the day that they claimed her disappearing.
Okay, at the top of this episode, I mentioned to you that Kevin Woodworth more or less stormed out of an interview with Bismarck PD in 2019. I also said that I would have done the same thing. We'll get back to Jaden in a minute, but I want to dive into this now as it all relates to what Jaden just said. And what did Jaden just say? He said that law enforcement told him that his father and grandfather reported his mother missing later the same day she dropped off Jaden and vanished. The reason investigators focused on this, and curiously they still focus on it to this day, is that it is felt that to report Michele Shelly Julson as missing just hours after she was expected home would be far too early, because Shelly was routinely late. Reporting her early like this would be suspicious, they feel. And in this case, I have to agree. Knowing what we've learned about Shelly, it would be a bit early, and perhaps it would be suspicious to report her missing just 6 hours after she was expected to return. But here's the thing. It's not true. They didn't report her missing 6 hours after she was expected back. They reported her missing the next day, in fact, the next evening, some 33 hours after she dropped off Jaden at his paternal grandparents'. That is, according to all the initial investigative work done by Detective Walls, Cliff Emmert, Julie Thompson, Lieutenant Heinley, Officer Scheibele, and others, all documented in the original police reports, in newspaper articles, and even in the original missing persons report itself. It's all laid out clearly in Shelly's file. According to the original police reporting, Shelly dropped off Jaden on Tuesday, August 2nd at 12:30 p.m. Then Kevin and his father reported her missing on Wednesday, August 3rd at about 9 p.m. in the evening. Last seen Tuesday, reported missing Wednesday, not 6 hours, 33 hours later. But that's not what investigators told Jaden in recent years. No, they basically said something along the lines of, hey, your dad reported your mom missing just hours after she was expected home. That's suspicious. And that's what investigators threw in front of Kevin Woodworth's face during a long interview in 2019, just before he stormed out in frustration. This also documented in Shelly's cold case file. Now, granted, in that 2019 interview, there were many other things they wanted to talk to Kevin about first. And in that interview, before they bring this up, Kevin acknowledges, in fact, he tells them his memory is very fuzzy. They're talking about events that happened some 27 years earlier. He basically says, hey man, I can't keep all this stuff straight in my head. So the investigators try to refresh his memory. They push Kevin pretty hard, suggesting it's time for him to confess. Kevin tells them again, as he's always maintained, that he had nothing to do with it. So they drop a type of bombshell on him. They say, look, Kevin, we know you called us the same day she went missing. Then something very interesting happens. Kevin's memory might be shady on some things, but what's obvious in the interview report is that he is in no way confused or uncertain about this detail. He might not know exactly when they called the police, but he knows this. It sure as hell wasn't the same day Shelly dropped Jaden off at his parents' house. But when Kevin, without hesitation, protests and attempts to correct the detectives, they cut him off, they interrupt him, won't let him finish, they won't listen, they lean in even more, basically telling him to stop lying. And then Kevin has had enough. He stands up, says, "We're done," and he walks out. And as I said, I would have done the same thing in his position because there's nothing in any of the original reporting that indicates that the Woodworths reported Shelly missing the same day. That narrative evolves later over time and comes into sharp focus in 2016. Eventually, it becomes a central point in investigators' theories about what might have happened to Shelly, theories that point to Kevin. Now, retired police officer Rob Carvell spoke with us in a previous episode about his 2016 reinvestigation. Carvell put a huge amount of work into this case and perhaps tried as hard or harder than anyone before him to find answers. He acknowledges that he only looked at the Kevin and Richard angle of this case. He didn't touch Rick Snell or railroad workers, for example. Here he is with that interview with Dakota Spotlight.
You know, I honestly, personally did not look at them. I just, once I got on Kevin, I thought that.
It is first during Carvell's investigation in 2016 and in interviews he conducts with people 22 years after the fact that the day of Tuesday, August 2nd, begins to take on a different shape in the Shelly Julson cold case file. I recently reached out to Rob Carvell to get a comment on all this. He maintains that he still believes that they likely reported her missing the same day, that is, Tuesday. He says he recalls it being too early. After all, perhaps you will recall that he is the patrolman who responded to the initial call for service in 1994, and he himself filed the initial missing persons report. Certainly, we feel he should know if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Carvell acknowledged to me last week in an email that he knows memory fades over time, but he simply recalls it likely being Tuesday. However, as I stated, nothing in the original reporting supports this. Now, can I prove with 100% certainty that the Woodworths did not call the same day? I suppose not. I mean, I don't have the Woodworths' phone records or anything like that. But here are just some of the things I do have. Things that would clearly demonstrate that Richard and Kevin Woodworth reported Shelly missing on Wednesday and not Tuesday, as law enforcement would tell Jaden and accuse Kevin of some 22 years later. Number 1. The original missing persons report, reported by Rob Carvell himself. It states the reported date as 8/3/94 at 21:40. That is Wednesday at 9:40 p.m., not Tuesday. To see a copy of that, go to inforum.com/callmeshelly, all in one word, inforum.com/callmeshelly. Number 2, on Saturday, August 6, 1994, that is 4 days later, at a time when Linda Julson's recollections of the events surrounding her daughter's disappearance would be very fresh, the Bismarck Tribune published an article which states the following, quote, Mrs. Julson said Kevin Woodworth called her and her husband Wednesday night about the same time as they reported the disappearance to the police. Unquote. Number 3, in a different article that first week, Detective Walls, the lead investigator on this case, told the Bismarck Tribune that the Woodworths reported Shelly missing on Wednesday at 9:40. Number 4, when Carvel first responded to the Woodworths' call for service, he was told that before calling the police, they had spoken with Tony, the bartender at Burnt Creek Club. When Tony is interviewed at length by police just a few days later, he says the Woodworths called him on Wednesday. There are several other clear indicators and clues in Shelly's file that point to Wednesday, but what I feel is perhaps the most telling in all of this are the initial interviews performed that first week with the two very people that reported Shelly missing, Kevin and Richard Woodworth. They recount a clear timeline. She drops off Jaden Tuesday, but does not return. Richard and his wife try calling Shelly at home that evening, and up until midnight, no answer. They continue to call her the next day, Wednesday, with no luck. Then they call Kevin after his work shift and tell him what's going on. They speak to some of Shelly's co-workers, but nobody's seen her. Then they decide they should report her missing. Kevin and Richard recount this timeline to the police just days after the fact, and nowhere in those interviews do Walls or Emmert or Thompson challenge or correct them. They never say, "What do you mean Wednesday? You called us Tuesday." Is it any wonder that Kevin Woodworth stormed out of the Bismarck Police Department in 2019? After this short break, law enforcement's reactions to my findings in regards to this date discrepancy, and much, much more from Shelly Julson's son, Jaden Woodworth. When I contacted Rob Carvel recently about these discrepancies that I found, he offered some explanations as to why he believes Shelly's cold case file doesn't reflect the timeline as he recalls it. Regarding the initial missing persons report that he himself filed, he believes he simply wrote down the wrong date. And since he wrote down the wrong date, he suggests that Detective Walls may have thereby passed along the wrong date to the Bismarck Tribune. However, when I first brought up this date discrepancy to Carvel and the present-day Bismarck PD, when I attempted to explain that all the original police work and reporting point to Wednesday, I was told, no, the Woodworths must have reported her missing Tuesday because, they said, Detective Walls started working on this case the next day, and he started on it on Wednesday afternoon. So, they submitted, how could Sergeant Walls be working on it Wednesday afternoon if the Woodworths didn't report her missing until Wednesday night? That statement, however, is 100% inaccurate and false. The police file clearly demonstrates that Detective Walls started working on it on Thursday afternoon, not Wednesday. When I submitted these facts, however, it was then suggested to me that perhaps Walls didn't start working on it the first day. Maybe it was 2 days later. Now, this detail about when Shelly was reported missing, it might seem a bit trivial to some. James, why are you focusing on this so sharply? Some might ask. After all, this does not clear Kevin or his father from any potential involvement in Shelly's disappearance. Investigators will likely continue to consider Kevin a person of interest, regardless if they reported her missing Tuesday or Wednesday. And that may be true, but correcting this part of the narrative does make a huge difference for someone else. In fact, for two people, Jaden Woodworth and his father, Kevin. Kevin for obvious reasons. When I showed up at Kevin's doorstep several weeks ago, he declined to speak with me for this podcast. In fact, he seemed upset. He said, I've said everything I'm ever going to say about it. I now understand why. He's frustrated, and for good reason. In his mind, why should he talk if no one's going to listen? Before leaving Kevin's front yard that day, I handed his wife an envelope. In it was a copy of the original missing persons report with Wednesday, August 3rd, 1994, written in the little box labeled Date Reported. I suggested to his wife they hang on to that piece of paper. But all of this makes a big difference for Jaden Woodworth, too. As we know, Jaden Woodworth lost his mother in August of '94. He grew up without a mother and was raised by his father. But over the last few years, he's been estranged from his father, too. The full story about what brought him to this point is complex, but one of the reasons leads back to this detail. This motherless son was given inaccurate information by detectives. In essence, without any proof, what they relayed to Jaden was, your dad and grandfather reported are missing the same day. Therefore, your dad's behavior is suspicious. Essentially, Jaden, your dad might have killed your mom. To say that this statement changed Jaden and Kevin's relationship is putting it mildly. How does that make you feel today, learning that police told you and your father that?
You know, it made me look at my dad a lot differently for the time being. Until finding this out, you know, it made it seem very suspect, and I was dealing with a lot at the time. You know, I was dealing with my own stuff, and it just it all compiled onto one thing, you know. And I remember when I spoke with them, I was just heading out to the oil field, and you know, pretty much made a pit stop to do this. So I had all this information thrown at me that I couldn't even really take the time to comprehend. It made me feel pretty empty at the time. I mean, it was kind of a wow moment, you know. It broke my heart in a way.
It made you suspect your own father, correct?
Yes, it definitely, it affected the way that I looked at my dad and what I've been told and believed, I guess, you know. And there was a lot of distrust, really. You know, these are the people that are supposed to be my protector from a young age up, and you know, it was a very confusing time for me, you know.
When is the last time you spoke to your father?
Probably 8 months ago. I've been locked up for a little while here. Yeah, I spoke with him, I think 4 days after I went to court and got sentenced to prison. So, yeah, it wasn't very good, you know, but he's helped me out at times where I've needed it. And, you know, it's not my proudest moment, but sometimes I took that for granted, and I definitely shouldn't have. So, I mean, I got some apologizing to do, and, you know, actions speak louder than words. So I gotta just keep my butt out of trouble. I mean, it's gotten to be enough.
I'd like to note here that I passed along what Jaden told me to Rob Carvel. As I said, he still feels that the Woodworths called the same day, but he made this statement in a recent email. Quote, "If I caused a rift between father and son, however, it is regrettable and I apologize." Unquote. I asked Jaden Woodworth about his grandfather, Richard, who is now deceased.
You know, he's always been really good to me. And I think it might be because he made a lot of mistakes with his own kids. I don't know. He was kind of a jerk, I guess.
Do you think he could be responsible for your mother's disappearance?
I mean, that's a hard one to say. I've asked the question to a couple of I asked my aunt at one time, and she said, God, no. And I don't know. He's pretty verbally abusive at times. You know, him and my grandma, they get into it sometimes, but the most I've ever seen him do is break a dish or, you know, slam around some furniture, but nothing too besides being pretty verbal at times, you know.
Did you ever talk about your mother with your Richard and your paternal grandparents?
A couple times when I was younger, I guess, maybe up into my teens, but he kind of pitched that whole kidnapped by bikers thing to me, and you know, when he threw that at me, I was like, no. I was like, highly unlikely, you know. But I mean, I've asked for I've been asked different questions over the years, and I ever was told was the last time that anybody had seen her was We Fest and whatever, and that was kind of where that ended. Besides the whole unlikely scenario of being kidnapped by bikers.
Wow. I can't imagine what it's like growing up like that, being told, yeah, your mom went to a event and didn't come back, or possibly was abducted. I mean, do you remember being a little kid thinking which version of that you would have preferred?
I I did struggle with it a little bit through elementary school, and not so much, I guess, into middle school and all that. But she was a part of my life, and then she wasn't, and then it was just my dad and I and my grandparents, and it was a hard thing to grasp, I guess, or to like accept. But I don't know. I just don't really remember grieving, I guess, too hard on it, or like being too much of a problem at the time. But I mean, looking back, I think it's caused a lot more grief than I anticipated, or that I could understand.
I'm sure you're right. Like, kids are great at adapting, and probably what you had to do.
I tried to look at it as a more positive thing. My mom might have really saved me by dropping me off at my grandparents if something had happened to her from point A to point B. Like if she would have just decided to take me along and go run her errands or whatever, who knows if I'd even be here. I didn't realize until now, looking back, it caused me a lot of different feelings that I didn't quite understand either. It's a different situation, It's strange to me that it's my life.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I can't imagine what it'd be like to be the person who's, to hear this podcast the first time, and that's your mom we're talking about. I just can't imagine. Speaking of your maternal grandparents, Wes and Linda, how was that listening to them on the podcast? And tell us about them.
They're great people. They're such awesome people, and they've spent a lot of time with me, as much as they could. Holidays, everything from, when I was younger, they were always around, and it's kind of on me right now as far as getting to see them and stuff. They're getting up in age, but hearing them on the podcast, yeah, it kind of, honestly, it made me tear up pretty good, because they're just such sweet people. I love them a lot. I think I kind of owe it to them to get my stuff together here and let this be the last time that I'm in this kind of situation, because I'm 31. This is getting old. I'm not very proud of where I'm at right now, but yeah, I'm moving forward. So.
In my interview with Tony Holm, Shelly's on-again, off-again boyfriend, he told us that he used to babysit Jaden. I asked Jaden if he remembered Tony. He thinks he does, although he's not 100% certain it was him. He just remembers waking up one day at his mother's trailer.
Walking out in the living room, and there's this guy sitting on the couch, and I don't know if I was like afraid of him or whatever. I don't know if I liked him. It was just a moment where like I seen this dude, and I turned around and just went back to my room. And that's about all I remember of that. But I just remember seeing somebody who, you know, obviously wasn't my dad, and my mom wasn't there. I think I was more more expecting to come out and my mom to be out there, you know.
I asked Jaden more about his thoughts on things I reported in this podcast.
The whole Rick Snell thing was kind of, I mean, that seemed kind of like a lead. I mean, especially with his record and stuff. I don't know. And then, you know, him not returning to work during the time of her being gone, and then, you know, her car showing up. It'd be interesting to talk to him about it or whatever, but I don't know. From what it sounded like he was kind of going through some mental stuff.
In the police file, and according to Connor, he didn't talk to him. No one has shown him a picture of your mother or anything, to my knowledge. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it would be interesting to talk to him, and, you know, I don't know, I guess for questions to be asked.
Yeah, I'd like to show him a picture of your mother and her car and just see what he says. Recently, I sent a certified letter to the address listed for Rick Snell in Montana. I got the address from an online list of sex offenders. Those addresses are usually pretty well updated. The letter was returned to me, however, with the following information. Return to sender, no mail receptacle, unable to forward. I don't know if that means he does not live there, or if he just uses a P.O. box and the Postal Service wouldn't forward it. Perhaps Bismarck PD can sort that out and speak to this unturned stone, Mr. Rick Snell. Perhaps you will recall that there is a section of Shelly's file that is missing, 104 pages in all. These were removed just a few weeks after Shelly vanished, about the time she was reported being seen at Wee Fest in Minnesota. Lieutenant Myron Heinley instructed Detective Walls to remove the whole section of the report.
I was really curious about the 104 missing pages, you know, from her report, and that's a lot of information to be just gone. You know, that's a notebook.
And no one seems to have an explanation. Your grandmother said, Linda says, you know, what does Bismarck Police Department have to hide? She went that far.
Right. And I mean, it went from, you know, Don Schaefer was accused of harassing her at times and everything. And I mean, I don't know. Him and what was it, Myron
Heinley.
Yeah, they were the only ones that could have I guess removed information like that too. And I mean, it's unfortunate that they're also deceased, but it would be very interesting to get that information and see what that was all about, you know, and why it's been removed. You know, I will say one thing, is that I can't remember if my dad went along when they picked her car up from the police impound, but another significant thing that my dad had said was that her seat in her car was moved all the way back, and my mom was like, she was short, and he's like, you know, and that could have been from them moving it around or whatever, law enforcement or towing company, whatever. But I mean, he said they noticed that her seat was all the way back and stuff, like, you know, like somebody bigger than her was possibly driving it. Yeah, and the car was clean. From what my dad and my grandfather say too, is that her car, you know, she always had like fast food bags and stuff laying around in it and all sorts of, you know, random stuff like that. So she, you know, it wasn't a super tidy car at all times.
So you're saying when your dad saw it, not at the Comfort Inn parking lot, but later after the police had it for a while, that it just seemed cleaner and the seat was moved back further than, which does make sense. Maybe if they drove it, someone would have to do that maybe, but.
Yeah.
Jaden Woodworth's life, his trajectory, it's been quite different than mine and probably different from yours too. As Jaden stated himself, for a while his mother was part of his life, and then suddenly she just wasn't. He's gotten into some legal trouble, but as he told us, that's getting old, and he wants change now. And you do get the feeling that change is coming for Jaden Woodworth. One change now is that he has new information, corrected information, about when his dad and grandfather reported his mother missing. A minor detail for others, but for him, life-changing.
Yeah, that was such a weird moment, honestly. I didn't know how to really process that or feel about it, and I even asked him about it, and I think he was very frustrated with the whole thing, and it just, it sounds like they looked at him pretty hard there and all that, but my dad and I talked about this one of the last times that him and I had spoke, and he had stated to me, he's like, Jaden, I never wanted to raise you on my own. And he said he definitely could have used my mom's help, and he wanted her around. He didn't want to have to raise me on his own, and he did the best he could, and he's always done very well for me. We had a pretty close relationship for a while there, and then I started going down a different path and making mistakes along the way. And it's like I said, I'm 31 now, and it's about time I keep my head in the right direction and surround myself with like-minded people that just want good for me.
I'd like to thank Jaden for participating in this episode. Jaden, we all wish you well moving forward. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next time right here on Dakota Spotlight.